You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and it's time for our yearly coverage of the ICM Forum Film Festival, ICM FFF 2024, the 8th edition, also called ICM FFF 8. 8 years, everyone, of just showcasing hidden gems from across the globe. It's a process I'm incredibly proud to have been a part of. It will run from the 18th of November to the 15th of December. And if you're not already a member, come on over to icmforum.com and join in. There'll be a lot of discussion, and we'll all be watching these films together and discovering them together. It's always a fantastic time on the forum. Regular listeners will know that I've been attached to this festival for a few years now already, first as a juror and from 2021 and onwards as a member of the programming committee. And every year since this podcast started, we have dedicated an episode to talking through each film on the main slate, with shout-outs to films from the entire program. You can go through our library and listen to our coverage of ICM FFF 2020 and onwards for more recommendations. But today, it is all about ICM FFF 8. I'm joined by my fellow programmer, Matthew Scott, and in this episode, we will share our thoughts on each of the 10 films in the main slate. And there are some absolute masterpieces here you should seek out ASAP. From hand-painted, yes, painted animation to touching family sagas to 2 time travel-ish indies with widely different ideas, a nightmarish odyssey through a dying girl's imagination, and just so much more. And just a quick note, we are recording this episode before the side slates are officially locked in, but at least half are decided, and we'll shout them out as always. In fact, the film most programmers agreed were great. In other words, the film that got the most support rating-wise ended up not making the cut for the main slate. But don't worry, we will reveal what that film was, and it will be in one of the side slates. So make sure to listen in and check out what film that was. Anyways, Matt, great to have you back on. Before we start going through the films themselves, this was actually your very first year as a programmer after previously serving as a juror. Do you want to say a little bit about your experience of joining the programming team?
I tell you what, Chris, I was actually a programmer in the very first year, and I forgive you for not remembering that, or at least not knowing it, because I completely forgot. I was actually, just doing a little historical check through the spreadsheet, and I went back to first year. It was a long time ago, and I saw my name as a programmer. I was like, and then I remembered we had used a completely different scoring system. I did look at the films. I said, I remember this. So I had actually forgot.
I'm so sorry about that, but if you forgot, I'm excused as well, I guess. Well, that's great. You were a pioneer.
But yeah, I think as well that Outdoor Cats, who was leading the charge on this film festival very early on, he actually ran one on the old IMDb Film General Board, and all the IMDb boards got shut down, and so a load of us migrated over to ICM Forum. But, I'd been involved in programming a sort of precursor of that festival, I guess. So, obviously I'm a sort of glutton for punishment, and I sort of keep coming back, and pretty much every one of the film festivals I've watched a lot of movies from and found a lot of new favorites from, so I'm ready to be back.
Well, I was going to say that it's great for you to finally join, but now I know that it's a glorious return, so really excited about that as well. And with that, I think we can just jump into the main slate itself. And the very first one here is the only film that you didn't actually see, which is a film that I actually consider an absolute masterpiece. So going in alphabetical order, the first film on the main slate is the Spanish drama 20,000 Species of Bees from 2023. This is the feature debut of Spanish director Isablis Urresola Solaguren. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. But regardless, watch out for her in the future. I mean, the film does one of the things that I love most of all. It manages to place us inside the viewpoint of a young child and experience the world as she does. The camera work is spectacular, always alive and moving, just genuinely visceral, with the depth of the story in large part coming from the way it tackles sexual identities, as the young girl we follow was not born female and her family to various extents struggle with how to approach essentially how to react to her, how she wants to express herself, how she wants to define herself, and what to call her. It's beautifully non-judgmental as we just follow the family react in different ways, try to deal with it, try to figure out what's best for her. Though it also tells the story in such a wonderfully visceral way that we can feel our lead's emotions as well as those of her family, especially her mother, who is probably the one grappling the most with how to respond. We talked about this one in the Best Films of 2023 podcast already. So if you want to hear a deeper discussion and debate around this film, go back and listen to that episode. So luckily there is a lot of additional content about this film. But yeah, I just love pretty much everything about it. And the young actress who plays lead, Sofia Otero, is also, she delivers such a powerful performance. I think it was Saul's favorite performance, or one of his favorite performances of 2023 as well. She just brings so much to the film. It's absolutely one of the films that you just need to run out and seek out. So, sorry you didn't get to it, Matt, but I think you'll really love it when you finally do.
I was really annoyed not to get to it because I mean, it's not just Soul that thinks it was the best performance. Like, the 9-year-old actress won the Silver Bear at Berlin. That's an amazing thing to have achieved at age 9. But I think we have had films about childhood in the festival before. I'm thinking actually it's another one new program last year was Playground, which was absolutely amazing film. There's been a few others as well, so I'm really excited to see it. I just ran out of time yesterday, and that's the only one I didn't get to. But I really am stoked to see it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your reaction to it during the festival, because obviously this is not the end. So for those of you who want to know what Matt will think about 20,000 Species of Bees, you can come on the forum and find out more there. So with that, we can move on to the next film in the main slate, where we find the stress-inducing British thriller Femme by Sam H. Freeman and Ingshun Ping, which follows a young man who is the victim of gay bashing while wearing drag makeup. And sometimes later, after just locking himself away, struggling with anxiety and barely going out, finally pushing himself back out there, he runs into his attacker at a gay hookup spot. And they start a toxic and dangerous affair. The attacker is clearly unstable and could snap at any moment, while our lead wants revenge. For my part, this is one of the most uncomfortable and stressful viewings I've had of late. I could feel the danger around every corner and that just violence could occur just pretty much at any moment. Were you as uncomfortable as me watching this one, Matt?
I thought it was an amazing movie. Yes, of course, it's very stressful because you just imagine as soon as someone gets attacked that they might leave it in the hands of the police. Obviously, that didn't happen here, and I know that there's been a huge amount of anticipation about this film because it won a BAFTA as a short film, as a version of it as a short film, and it is just a very visceral film. I love the sort of things that it does. I think it's essentially what it's doing is, instead of after an attack like that, where you just sort of try and get as far away from that person as possible and be dealing with the trauma for the year, there'll be courts involved. Here, the idea is that you actually start a relationship with that person in order to take revenge. In this case as well, the revenge would be another crime, but I think then there's this sort of strange process of of empathy, whereby the victim starts to work out, well, the person that did this to me is actually gay themselves, but is very troubled and is part of a subculture where they're not allowed to show who they are. You know, a lot of people could take this story and run with it, but I think here the cast is actually really impressive. Even minor characters in the movie act really impressively, and Nathan Stewart Jarrett plays Jules, who we see in drag at the start of the movie, but then sort of loses confidence potentially in wearing drag. Also has to start dressing a mask to be in this strange relationship. And then there's the other actor is George Mackey, and he's just incredible. And he's quite a famous character. I think if people are wondering where they might have seen him, 1917, the war movie, where he plays the Lance Corporal who has to deliver this message out to the field to stop an attack that the enemy knows is coming. So I think there's really great acting chops in here. We should warn viewers that it's quite an explicit movie. There's a lot of quite graphic sex in there. You know, sometimes it's unpleasant sex. You know, for example, you achieve coitus and then in the woods and then just leave your partner in the woods, for example, which is quite sort of unpleasant. Obviously, the attack's very unpleasant as well. But I think this was a pretty incredible movie, and I'm excited that we've programmed it.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything you were saying there, Matt, especially about the performance of George McKay. He is just so scary, but at the same time, as the film progresses and you get close to him, you also start to develop a bit of empathy with him, because he shows a degree of vulnerability, and you can kind of feel the same kind of conflicted emotions towards him that Jules, our protagonist, does, and that's just so hard to achieve. So I'm just truly impressed by his performance here and his range. And I mean, this is not his. Like, he had more fantastic performances in 2023. He was also in The Beast, where he's plays several different characters. So, wow, yeah, he's one of the best actors working right now.
Yeah, the Beast was actually been two adaptations of the same Henry James ghost story in the same year to make things confusing. But yeah, he's in the Bertrand Bonello, which is one of my favourite films that I've seen in the last year. He is actually amazing, and I mean, I think it's interesting to sort of try and draw parallels between different films that have been in festivals in the past and this. You know, we often sort of have films dealing with what it's like to be a child and to be different, and there's often a lot of resistance to children wanting to be different. And then in a film like Femme, you find out what happens if a child isn't allowed to be different. They end up denying their sexuality, end up in this case becoming a gay basher. You know, it certainly doesn't excuse what he does in the film at all, but it's a direct consequence of not having been allowed to ever be who he was.
Yeah, so it's so true. And our next film is actually dealing with the way kids are raised as well, and the kind of trauma and the kind of paths certain types of social education can take you on. It's our only documentary in the main slate, 4 Daughters by Kotor Benhania, which is actually my favorite film from 2023, full stop, and a film that I talked about at length in the best films of 2023 episode. So if you want to hear me talk even more about this one, you can go there. But it is just an incredibly powerful look at trauma, loss, family, and memory, done in a truly unique way. A mother has lost 2 of her 4 daughters, and for most of the film, we do not know what happened. However, this broken family is reformed as Benhania hires 2 actresses to portray the missing daughters and asks the family to reenact the defining moments of their tragedy, processing it themselves along the way. An actress has also been hired to replace the mother in scenes too tough for her to manage. But rather than falling into traps of being a standard reenactment documentary, the film is about reenactments and how these reenactments actively confront the past. The actresses ask questions. Scenes are stopped midway, sometimes because either the actors or the real people are too uncomfortable, they can't handle the feelings, or they wonder how the older sisters reacted or felt or behaved in these moments, how the younger girls felt in these moments. The reenactments allow reflections, understanding, debate, judgment. It's a film that does so many of the things I tend to hate in documentaries, including talking heads, but it tells such a powerful and involving story and showcases such emotions that I got completely caught in it. It's also one of the few films that manages to be simultaneously, I guess, practical, artificial, in the sense that it actively engages with the fact that it's a film. And there's just really exciting things with that, as well as just being fully human with an engrossing personal narrative. It's just extremely exciting for me to see just how the festival audience will respond to this one, because I think for a film of this kind, it just has such broad appeal. How did you feel about this one, Matt?
I thought it was a pretty incredible film. Like you, I had severe misgivings going into it because I really don't like this type of movie, shall we say. It's exactly like you say, I don't like to see talking head documentaries. And even like with stuff like experimental documentaries, sometimes I think it can go very wrong. It absolutely didn't go wrong here. And I think that's one of the fun things about being a programmer. Other people, yourself in this case, will say, or, can you watch this? And probably isn't a movie that I would have watched, but I did watch it and I loved it. And I think you teed it up really well there, because I think it's best not to know exactly what this film is about before you go into watching it, and let it come as a surprise to you. So I wouldn't read too much about this movie if you haven't seen it. Again, it just demonstrates so clearly what happens if you perturb childhood. If you have people in your household who are abusing you, if there are sort of shells falling in your neighborhood, if there's warfare going on, it is just a great example of the amount of damage that can cause. And I think it actually changed my views on some things as well. As part of the movie, without trying to give too much away, there's an attempt at an extradition at the moment, at one point, and that extradition not being successful. But there's a case in the news in the UK which bears a lot of similarities, and I felt it very difficult to sort of empathize with. But when I watched this movie, it felt a lot easier to do that. And I think it is a very emotional movie, so it's one of those that you could have a box of Kleenex ready for, just right from the start. And it really is what has happened, essentially. Although it might seem like an odd conclusion to some people, knowing just if they just read a newspaper article about this, what the story really is about a woman who's had 4 daughters and, managed to lose 2 of them. And at the start, it's very electric when the directors managed to find 2 actresses who look very much like the missing 2 daughters, and they sit together, and then, the mum starts crying, and it really is about a family breakup. It's also about misogyny in a way. Well, not in a way. It is a film about misogyny. It's not the only film about misogyny we're going to talk about today, but just the absolutely absurd expectations that are placed on the girls. There's a scene in the movie, where one of the children has injured their leg and takes a photo of the scar. And the mum thinks that picture is a picture of her bum, essentially, because the sort of leg joint looks a bit like that, sort of focused in, and absolutely flies off the handle, thinking that it's something to do with pornography. And it's just this sort of pervasive generational damage that's happening. The mum has been abused. There's probably been a long line of misogynistic treatment down that sort of matrilineal generation. And I think it's a movie that leaves you with some hope. Clearly, there is some possible good futures for some of the family members here, but there is also a little bit of despair, which again, we don't want to give the whole game away. But I just think something that I really like about movies that I've realized recently is emotional acuity. It's when people really understand how humans work rather than how humans are supposed to work, ideologically. I just think there are some wonderful moments where one of the sisters, for example, says something very unpleasant to one of her other sisters and then wishes she could take it back, and she goes and can't sleep at night and pulls her hair out over it. And there are just lots of moments in the film that have a great emotional breadth and depth. So I do think it's an amazing film. I think it's perhaps the film that I'm most excited about programming.
I'm so excited to hear you say that, Matt. Yeah, definitely be sure to seek out Four Daughters, even if you're listening to this after the festival is over. It's truly powerful. And our next feature goes in a completely different direction. It is the found-footage sci-fi film Lola, which follows a genius inventor and her sister in the World War II years, as they use their wavelength machine, the titler Lola, to sync into radio waves from the future. First, in 1939, they fall in love with David Bowie, Bob Dylan, and the music and life of the future. But they also see that the war is coming and try to use their machine to save lives with unintended consequences. How did you feel about Lola, Matt? Because I think this wasn't exactly our type of film in general.
Yeah. So I must admit that particularly I don't like time travel movies usually. Like, I've met film fans before who that's basically been their main thing. They watch movies because they want to watch time travel movies. And amusingly, we've ended up programming 2 time travel movies here. So I think it is a movie that I got into eventually. It, has a very sort of strong hypnotic atmosphere. So that was something positive about it. I did feel a little bit, and some people will care about things like this more than others. The first thing I felt about it was that it was a little anachronistic. The 2 main actresses, I just felt that they felt very contemporary in their sort of gestures and movements, and their speech patterns, initially felt very contemporary, even though they were in 1940s. Obviously, every movie about time travel is going to contain conceits, but the conceit here that as a self-taught scientist, you discover how to tune into radio waves in the future, with 1940s tech, and without actually any access to that tech because you're under wartime conditions. I just thought it was a little unreal. I do think that when you say it's unintended consequences, that a lot of the decisions Thomasina in the movie makes, she has a very poor judgment alongside incredible technical ability. And I think what actually might be interesting to me, what I'm taking from the film, is that we're obviously in an era where AI is getting better and better and better at a very rapid pace. And we are also in the same position where we are developing technically but not morally. And therefore, what types of poor decisions will we be making with the technologies that we're developing? I imagine that deliberate, that they were trying to evoke that, but I really do think at the moment that we're certainly outstripping our ability to cope with technology. And it reminded me actually of a recent watch that I had, the sort of very famous movie, The Social Network, which is really about the same thing. You have a group of young men who, morality is not their strong point, developing this huge technology that changes the way that human beings are. Perhaps that's not a very good idea for people that, wouldn't pass any sort of morality 101 test. So I took that away for it. I do think it is a movie that I would recommend to people, but I would just be very sort of clear what it is and what they're getting into. And I think there are programmers here who would absolutely rave about this one. And I think particularly, a regular programmer from past years, so this movie would be absolutely up its street.
Yeah, no, I think this is a film that will be divided the programmers a little bit. I liked it a lot, to be honest, but the people who are into genre cinema and cult cinema in general, they mostly loved this one. So yeah, this is really, really lo-fi. I agree with a lot of what you were saying. I struggle to believe that these women were actually from the 40s. I mean, there's some leeway here because, as the film says, they're kind of been living in a different time. Like the media they've been consuming in their mansion, being completely isolated from the world, has been from 20, 30 years in the future. Like they did play on this too, like they use words from the 60s and 70s, which confuse the people in the present time. So to a point, yes, but they also speak and act more like they're from the 2020s a bit.
Yeah.
Right? Despite the fact that they've never seen that. Like the furthest into the future they seem to have seen is the 70s. So it's a bit jarring. That part doesn't really work. I think that anyone who's into like this kind of found footage though will love it. It's really inventive. It has like, it's obviously shot on a shoestring budget, but like they even integrate Hitler in some scenes there without giving anything away. They integrate a lot of actual footage of various famous people in new context because the timelines is changing. So that's really fun and interesting, and it's definitely very creative. And it's one of those films with like a unique little mini angle and place of that, and you can get really drawn into that kind of excitement of, hey, this is a really cool idea. But yeah, it's not always that thought out. I thought the climax was a little bit silly. I think it also runs into the issue that the way the film is phrased from the beginning, like the very first words, and from the way you start seeing that, hey, what's happening here is not the timeline we're in. You kind of know where the film is going to go really quickly. I think that's to its detriment as well. Though it has some pretty iconic things. I know that the program who nominated it, for instance, was saying like at one point they make Really Got Me Now by the Kings, like they make that popular in the 1940s wartime, and it's more of a jazz version, for instance. And that you would love to get the soundtrack of that. Like it goes into some crazy ways, and I can definitely see why people are into this type of film. Would really love it. I really liked it. I thought it was just so energetic and fun and playful. But like I said, it's not quite my cup of tea either.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm thinking about Back to the Future, and now you mentioned the singing. Marty McFly sort of goes back to the era when his mum was young and plays at an event. And actually, the people that don't like the music, they initially like it, but then he sort of takes it too far in inverted commas, and then they just stare at him and like, what is this guy playing? And I'm not actually convinced by the idea that people would automatically take to music from the future. I actually think that the type of music people listen to in different eras are kind of defined by the way that people think in those eras. So I didn't find that believable. I didn't really find it a problem. But I think one of the things that I did find fascinating is that they essentially, when they start to affect the timeline, they do this little experiment where they show what punk music then looks like. And actually punk music somehow becomes this very authoritarian thing. There's this song about the hangman, and the hangman's coming for traitors, and it's sung by punks. And I guess I just found that very interesting, that actually the trappings of punk potentially could just be applied to any sort of music. So that was a lot of fun. I do think there are lots of things that you can take from this movie.
Definitely. And the next film coming up is another possible future cult favorite. But this time of more of a horror variety. It's Moon Garden from 2022, directed by Ryan Stevens Harris. This film is essentially this nightmare fuel. It's set within the decaying brainwaves of a young girl in a coma, struggling to stay alive while haunted by a dark, murderous creature. It's this insane visual odyssey filled with unsettling stop-motion monsters and scenery, and there's so much atmosphere despite its clearly low budget. This is also one that wasn't quite my thing, or at least so I thought, but I ended up really enjoying it, especially when it felt like a Sammy Swankmajer horror film. It's doing so many cool things with the monsters, just endlessly creative, endlessly playful, just darkly fun. Well, what did you think about the Moon Garden, Matt?
Yes, I think you're right to invoke Svankmajer. I so thought of Quay Brothers when I was watching it, and a film that is very beloved to me, L'Ange, or the Angel by Patrick Bokanovsky. just in the types of spaces it explores. So I think this movie is one where people are, you know, a lot of people have got fed up with CGI. A lot of people have started to notice that some of the CGI used these days just really isn't as good as some of the CGI that was used in the past, and that they find it kind of grating. So there is this sort of like, I don't know if you could call it countercultural movement where people are trying to go back to practical effects. And this is definitely a movie that's trying to do that. It's shot on very interesting sets, they try and use practical effects as much as possible. I believe it's shot on film as well to give it that old world feel. I guess my only real problem is that, in terms of nightmare fuel, there's only one character that is put into this situation, and then it kind of felt to me like, what's at risk here then? If it's like Jumanji, for example, where characters being exposed to this other world, you might at least be able to think one of the characters might come to a sticky end, whereas when it's one and it's a very tiny girl, you think that there isn't any way that the filmmakers are going to let it finish like that. So when you say it's nightmare fuel, I think it has the aesthetics of that. And, it's a very interesting movie. It's a sort of very brave movie. I wasn't sat there in fear, but I did find it very interesting that the child that is acting in the movie is just very young indeed. And it's just very interesting to see her responding to the set, I guess. So I think there are lots of different ways and things that people can take from this movie. I really like practical effects. I wouldn't say that I'm anti-CGI. I just wish it was used a bit better. I sat through The Irishman from Scorsese and was really disappointed by the effects that had been used to reverse aging, for example, on Robert De Niro. And I think it's more that I'm happy with practical effects. I'm happy with CGI as long as people are really putting their heart into them. But I think that is often the case with practical effects, that, the people that do practical effects just are absolutely kids with a toy box and that never grow old, and they just absolutely love it. So I feel often the practical effects side of things can work better. But yeah, I think another very interesting movie for the festival.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had some issues with the film. I thought it was a little rough around the edges and unpolished. But it was really saved by what you're talking about, like that brainness. It just had so much flair, color, and imagination. It reminded me a little bit of Valerie in a Week of Wonders as well. It's just the sheer delirium of it all ended up overcoming most of its shortcomings, which mainly stemmed from like what was clearly a very, very low budget. It kind of felt like I was watching Bertram Bendico do a homage to Svankmajer, but just toned down a little bit, maybe. Like, it was so visually interesting and fun. It's familiar, but it had that feeling of still being different. And yeah, no, I mean, watching the film, I guess you might never think that they're going to kill this girl, but I thought they might. I think that, you have this idea that if the monster ever catches her, she's dead in real life. And that is tense and interesting. And I loved all of the morbidly stylized characters and like just all of the wonky and completely unique sceneries and situations she ends up in as she just runs through her own imagination. It was just really, really exciting to watch. I thought the real world part of it was very slim, like the family were pretty much the stereotypes, but everything that goes on in her imagination, the way it just pumps up the colors, it was just engaging from start to finish. And like when you can do something like that what's probably a shoestring budget, I really look forward to seeing what Ryan Stephen Harris might end up doing in the future. And our next film still sticks to the theme of being a creative genre film, and it's that other time travel film you hinted at earlier there, Matt, River, a creative Japanese time loop comedy from Junta Yamaguchi, the director of the instant cult hit Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes. Which, like that one, could actually have been compared to Lola, but not this one. This is a literal time loop, but with a twist I have never seen before. Everyone is in this time loop. It's not just one or two person reliving the same day, having the same experiences and the same encounters, but rather a bunch of different characters jumping back to their starting points every 2 minutes and then trying to reach each other and find ways to break this loop with some pretty crazy and obviously hilarious results. So you mentioned that this is not the kind of thing you were into, Matt, but I seem to recall you like this more than Lola, at least.
Well, so I think it's mainly that I tend not to be into time travel movies. I mean, this one is actually a breath of fresh air, so it shows that, hopefully I'm capable of looking past framework that doesn't work for me usually. This actually did work for me. And I mean, I think it's interesting to compare it to Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes, which was a movie that I think was programmed last year. If it wasn't last year, it was the year before. So that's been in ICMFFF as well. So we have a returning director here. We call it a time travel movie, but I think the thing that I take away from both movies really is the relentless positivity and energy of the actors. Even when something quite disturbing has happened, everyone's kind of got a smile on the face. It very much feels to me like how amazing would it be to be involved in making these movies and to be there on set, because it looks like such a lovely group of people. And it's both movies, they don't really have a central character. They're ensemble movies and you don't have one personality dominating everything. So it's a funny movie. So it's set in Kibune, which is one of these sort of rural places in Japan that, looks like it's from past centuries, as Japan has moved on and, in many ways is the most futuristic country in the world. You can still go to places like Kyoto and Kibune and see something that's very much out of time. And that, I guess because it's out of time, that makes it kind of quite ironic to set a time travel movie there. But I think with the way that this works, I think it's like you say, the fact that every character in the movie essentially is aware of the time loop is quite powerful. It creates quite a different dynamic from the usual movies. And it's not the only one that's done this. I really like Palm Springs, and there's if memory recalls, I think there's 3 characters in that one who are aware of the time loop. But this really does feel different from any time loop movie I've seen. I very much started to get into the rhythm of it. This rhythm of all the actors is essentially have to go back to their starting positions every 2 minutes. I really started getting into that. I think they used that very well. I think it would be a struggle for any other filmmakers to come and take this script and do it any better. I really think they got everything out of the script that was possible. And I think it's very cathartic. Even though we're only seeing standard feature-length film amount of time expire, cognitive time, the amount of change that happens in this group, they all give up their assigned roles when they realize that time is repeating on itself. And I think that is very emotionally powerful. They all come to realizations about themselves within a very short space of time because of the time loop. This idea that some of them are, workers in the inn and some of them are guests dissolves very quickly when you perturb the timeline, and it's just lovely to see them all work together or occasionally against one another. So I think it's I hope it's a movie that everyone's excited to see. I'm excited that we're programming it, to be honest. And I think the key word is breezy. It really is a film that makes you feel welcome when you're watching it, and it's pretty cheerful.
Yeah, that's a very good description, Matt. I think River managed to recapture that feeling that we all got from Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes, where it's just so joyful and playful. It never takes itself too seriously. We know this is just like this little low-budget film. It just plays around with all of these ideas, and it's just so damn charming. It runs into some of the same issues as the previous one, where it gets a little sillier towards the end, but I do think it handles it a bit better. It has similar lo-fi aesthetics, And it kind of like when everyone starts the same starting point, it kind of just starts to struggle to, okay, how do we make this last and be a full feature? So you can kind of see how some things could be a little bit more stretched out than it might have to be, etc. But yeah, just so much fun, so joyful, and yeah, one of those films I think will definitely be like either a cult classic or just a full-blown classic in the future. Like let's see what Junta Yamaguchi does next, and if you're going to try to do another like 2-minute spin on something. The next movie up here just shows that the middle section of this program, alphabetically that is just filled with these genre films. So this is the very last one of this type of movie. It's the Spanish horror comedy, The Coffee Table, which is just deeply uncomfortable, awkward, unsettling, and one that definitely stands out from the crowd of other horror comedies that's come out lately. In fact, it more plays up the eerie atmosphere and the drama more than the really awkward situations, though. That those awkward situations where people don't know what's going on can possibly give some people some, let's say, awkward chuckles. How did you feel about this one, Matt?
So I think when you say awkward chuckles, the humour in here can be really pitch black. I imagine it's one of these where you're in a cinema and some people are laughing out loud, and there's other people out there thinking, "Why on earth are these people laughing?" But I think sometimes it goes so dark that I couldn't think of anything else to do other than laugh. I mean, I felt it would be quite an interesting movie for couples to watch together. I think. It's essentially, it's a bit of a cliche, but I have seen this quite a lot in my own life. It's a sort of relationship cliche where, you know, you have a heterosexual couple and they get married, and then you have to shape the living environment that you're in. And you know, whilst everything's always a conversation and you sort of both go along to pick wallpaper or what have you, often men are left feeling that they weren't part of any of the decisions, and that the environment, you know, the home that they've made all the decisions were made by their wife, essentially. And I imagine that the wives are sat there thinking, well, I wasn't choosing things that I like, you know, I was choosing for us. It's just a sort of different way that people in these different roles think about decoration. But essentially that gives you the setup of the movie, that they're in a sort of rather gloomy furniture store, and the man in the relationship is insisting that he's allowed to purchase this hideous coffee table. And, you know, there's a sort of weird salesman who is very obviously lying about the features of this table. The wife definitely doesn't want this table to be purchased, but he manages to have this heroic moment where he's allowed one thing, and that's the coffee table. And, you know, he's going to hold on to that like he's holding on to a piece of driftwood in the sea. Obviously, then what happens is that coffee table causes a lot of problems. I think in terms of, you know, what happens in the movie, it's not, I would say, a movie that left me with lots of things to think about, but I do think it is very cleverly done. I was expecting quite a big twist to come, and I had actually imagined one in my head, which I thought was very funny, and then what actually happened was not as interesting as I imagined. So I didn't walk away from it being a new favourite, but it is a lot of fun. I think definitely people that are interested in this genre will like this movie. It is very well made, tasteless in a tasteful way, I guess, if that doesn't sound too contradictory. But I think it's a nice piece of genre work that I hope the jurors enjoy.
Yeah, this isn't exactly my type of film, so I'm usually not into horror comedies, with some exceptions. This is one of the better ones, for sure. I didn't love it, but I thought it did a lot of interesting things, just like you said. It reminded me a little bit of The Invitation from 2015, in that it has this really unsettling atmosphere where you think that something could happen, someone could die or get killed at any point almost. It just kind of builds on that while also maintaining this sense of normalcy and like the contrast of that, and that the fact that it just keeps on with normalcy and people not knowing what's going on or what could happen, and just living life normally and talking and laughing while one person in particular is pretty much going out of their mind. That is really interesting and awkward to watch, and that part really won me over. I agree with you. The ending, it goes in a place that's, I wasn't expecting that ending, to be honest. I was expecting it to blow up in a very, very different way. So I can't criticize it that much, but it also wasn't that much. But no, this is for the horror fans, this is for the cult fans, and I think the fact we have so many of these genre films going in completely different directions, mind you. Like you had The Moon Garden earlier, which just goes all out crazy, and here you have something that goes far more intimate, almost entirely in one room, with a lot of awkward comedy. Yeah, completely different directions, but I think that we definitely have a very varied slate, including in the genre portion. So yeah, Matt and I are more art house oriented, but if you are in the genre pool of viewers, you might easily just love this one. But as I mentioned, this is the last all-out genre film. We have 3 more to go, and the 8th film in the main slate, going alphabetically, is The Peasants. It's the only animated film on the main slate, and it is the hand-painted film I mentioned earlier, done by DK and Hugh Welshman, the team behind Loving Vincent, and it uses the same style as their first film, first shooting with actors and then hand painting it shot by shot. This time they're adapting a bleak period drama about a young peasant girl married off the rich farmer while secretly in love with his son, and all of this in a society filled with gossip and judgment. I mean, the animation is breathtaking. The story itself felt a little bit slim and familiar to me, but it's definitely one of those special films you have to seek out. How did you react to The Peasants, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that you described the story as being slim, because, of course, the novel that this film is based off of won the author a Nobel Prize for Literature. So I haven't read the novel, but it definitely, I kind of ended up thinking, well, a lot has been lost in translation, or, you know, someone got quite a soft Nobel Prize there. I think it is very interesting, like you say, like Loving Vincent, it's shot with cameras first, and a huge array of artists from many countries come in and paint over the scenes. What I worry sometimes with both films is that they concentrate too much on that process and maybe sort of lose some of the story a bit. For example, with Loving Vincent, the story of Vincent van Gogh, so many movies have been made about that guy, and he was obviously someone who was capable of seeing things that other people couldn't see, particularly, had an amazing vision. But they don't do too much. They focus very much in that movie, for example, on Dr. Gachet and his jealousy about how good Vincent is at painting, and I feel that this movie isn't particularly deep. And like you, I felt that some of the tropes in the story were very familiar. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it reminded me very much of King Vidor movie from the 30s called Our Daily Bread, which was a bit of a passion project for him. A sort of semi-Randian film that he put his own money into, where essentially you have a hero, sort of agricultural sort of peasant hero, and he has 2 women essentially fighting for his attention. Sally, who's like a peroxide blonde floozy, and then another lady who's got dark hair. And of course you get into this trope where the blonde is obviously the bad girl and the dark-haired girls are good girls, and it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable every time I see something like that. And I actually in Our Daily Bread, the same thing happens, where the blonde bombshell Mae West type character, she's also lazy, like Yagna is in this movie. Yagna never really does any work, but she does these lovely paper cutouts that she puts all over the house. I do think there's a lot to say about this. You know, I read a comment by Wendy Ide. This got very mixed reviews from critics, but she called it a disconcertingly beautiful picture about the ugliness of humanity. And I do think there are themes in here which people might find very familiar. You know, everyone in the town is religious, but they're more pious than religious, and they're incredibly hypocritical about their religion. You know, they're always doing spiteful things to one another, but they turn up to church, and I guess that's one of the main problems that people have had with religion over the years. And I think something that you see in the movie a lot is misogyny. I think it's the heart of the film. Some of that misogyny seems to seep into the film a little bit to me. You know, it made me feel very uncomfortable, you know, watching what was happening, but also wondering how much people might think, well, you know, what's happening to this character? She deserves it. I got uncomfortable actually just reading the summary of the film on Wikipedia, because there were adjectives used in the plot. They described Yagner as promiscuous and spiteful, and they spoke about promiscuity in a negative way. So I actually ended up changing a lot of the adjectives in the plot summary on Wikipedia, which is, you know, I'm very, very rarely edit Wikipedia, but I think someone, you know, whoever wrote the plot summary had taken some of that misogyny, and so it's okay for, you know, women to want to have more than one sexual partner. But actually in the movie, Yagner is not promiscuous. That's the strange thing. Everyone's always gossiping about her being promiscuous, but you know, the vast majority of it is completely invented. You know, she's not spiteful at all. So it's a very strange movie. It's a very powerful movie. I think there are some dance scenes in it that I found absolutely electrifying. They're some of the best scenes I've ever seen in any movie, really. The dancing is just incredible. I also ended up thinking that it would be really interesting to see the live action version of this, just to see, you know, what is the painting adding to the process. I think when I read the sort of critical discourse surrounding this movie, a lot of people pointed out that although the style of the painting is done contemporaries of the author of the material, that actually their sensibilities were quite different. So that's a problem that some people had with the movie, but I imagine a lot of people wouldn't pick up on that. But it is a movie that does make you feel quite bad about humanity, about the way that people behave for one another, because some of it really does feel relatable. But I think there's also a way in which the film is quite pessimistic. And I did wonder, you know, I read some of the biographical detail about the author, and I wasn't really sure how qualified he was to write about peasant life, and I was slightly worried at points that he was being lurid on purpose, to be honest. So I guess the takeaway there is that there's a lot going on in this movie. So if you want to have a conversation about a movie, and if you want to have like these really big feelings, there's a moment where you get completely overwhelmed. This is the movie.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you were saying there, Matt. It's definitely one of those films that is mainly held up by the visuals for me. And it's interesting to hear you talk about, like, what does the animation style add to the story? Because with Loving Vincent, the big hook was that it told Van Gogh's story with his style. They're trying to paint the film in his style. And here is just a more straightforward narrative drama. So why did it make it that way? I mean, it's perfectly fine if you have a specific style you use. You can tell any story in it, but there was no specific purpose necessarily to use this style here. I also thought that more so than in Loving Vincent, the style was a strength, but it also has some issues, because when you work this way, when you film first and you just paint over screen by screen, it almost creates like a rotoscoping effect. Like it feels like a little bit like a Scanner Darkly, for instance. Like if it feels like it could have been computer generated almost. Like despite all of the artistry that goes into it, how beautiful each individual frame is, once they put them all together, it has that thing where it doesn't quite match, and the light, it's different, like things jump, and it causes this little bit of a jarring effect that's not always that great to watch. Like, it can be a little bit frustrating where, the same line's not traced similarly, the color's not traced the same way, and like every single frame, it just flicks a little bit. Like it's not exact. And that ended up bothering me. I do agree with you a lot on how the people framed the story. I mean, I think that like the society she lives in is essentially portrayed so horribly and with so much loathsome hate that it's hard not to feel for her. I mean, it's probably one of the most misanthropic films I have seen.
Yeah.
It just goes so dark. But in going that dark, it also... I'm not going to say strips away realism, because this kind of persecution, etc., happened, but it's essentially just society is hateful and terrible, and you have this more sympathetic character in the midst of it that's forced to do certain things. And it could have done with more character development. It could have done with a bit more story. It does feel like the story took the backseat to the animation style, but the animation style is eye-catching. So, like, I mean, this is definitely, like I said in the intro, one of those films that have to be seen. And we're running out of time a little bit here, so I'll jump on to the next one, which is The Sweet East, a wild, chaotic, and tongue-in-cheek slice of Americana, which takes a teenage girl on a school trip into wildly different subculture as she makes her way across the eastern states of the U.S. It's the directorial debut of fairly popular cinematographer Sean Price Williams, who among other things shot the Shafty Brothers' Good Time, and you can feel a bit of a kinship in this just frantic movement from situation and scenario, and this panic and the craziness and the dark comedy. It all just rolled into one crazy odyssey. It almost a little bit like Moon Garden, just not placed in a fever-fueled dream. So yeah, this is easily one of the standouts of the main slate for me. But what about you, Matt? What did you think about The Sweet East?
There was so much going on here that I actually watched it twice. The first time I watched it, I was like, what on earth is going on here? And I felt a bit like I was watching a Gregg Araki movie. It is one of these strange things, is that the movie has actually been released on VHS, if you can believe that. And although it is a very modern film in most ways, but I don't know if that was some sort of homage to that Gregg Araki era about making films about youth in a very anarchic way. But I did get a bit of a feel of that. It's a very sort of unusual story. So it's about a high school senior called Lillian who goes away on a school trip, and then something very drastic happens and she just decides to leave her current track behind and go off-piste. And then, you know, although the internet is never really raised in this movie, she does sort of start to encounter all the types of people that you see on the internet who have very extreme views, even though the people you meet in your real life don't seem to express all these extreme views. Maybe they're sat on them and maybe they just type them into the internet, but she actually sort of runs into, an Antifa group. She runs into a neo-Nazi group. She runs into an Islamist group, all these type of people that you see being very extreme online. And it's done in a very unusual way, in that Lillian is not really a heroine. She really is like a lot of teenagers. She's trying to find out who she actually is, and she doesn't really know who she is and what she's going to become. She actually talks about it at one point because she's been studying poetry at college, which is kind of interesting because you can see how difficult it's going to be to find work with a college degree like that. It's usually something that I associate with people that sort of degree with doing later in life, or, if they have more money behind them. But she is kind of very listless like that. And this poem that she mentions that she had written herself is that she kind of in a cocoon, and she doesn't really know what's going to come out of the cocoon, whether it's going to be a butterfly or a maggot. And I don't think we end the movie knowing the answer to that question, really. But she's really not a very cultured person. She's not very educated, but I think the funny thing is that she can almost see through all the groups she encounters straight away. You know, she will just sort of offhand ask them questions and that are just very skewering, even though she's not particularly intelligent. And I guess, you know, I appreciated that more the second time I watched it, just that it was very funny. I think it's the phrase you use, tongue in cheek, I think is the best way to describe this movie. It's just very funny how easy it is for her to deconstruct what everyone's doing. And I think, yeah, actually, one of the other groups is like a filmmaking group, you know, so there's a little bit of satire about what goes on in the film industry as well. You know, I don't know how many film people would like being bunched in with Antifa sort of fascists and Islamist extremists, but they are in this movie. So I loved it enough to watch it twice. I think it's one of those movies that's going to go into my favorites. I think I'm going to need to watch it several times, to be honest, because it isn't, I guess, an easy movie where everything's signposted for you. I think at points it's satirical. I think at points it's quite serious. All sorts of fun sort of special effects going on. There's some models that come in at one point. It's a little bit of cartoon work. I do think it is a movie about America today, and I think the whole sort of world has been surprised to see everything descend into factionalism there, and just to see how low quality every conversation is, you know, about every important issue, you know, no matter who you're talking to. And I think this is a movie that's trying to capture something about that.
It's very beautifully put, Matt. And yes, absolutely. I think that the fact that she just kind of goes from extreme to extreme, she just essentially falls in with them. She listens to them. She takes decisions along the way, often very cowardly or manipulative. She uses people a lot, but she also just goes along with what they're saying and kind of just blends in. And that's a real interesting character to watch. That's just such a unknown in terms of how she will respond. And like you said, who she is. I think this could be one of those great American classics decades down the line. It's one that definitely has, like you said, the pulse on internet culture and just how divided America is. And it does that with a really unique and creative dynamic changes in styles as well. I mean, like I said earlier, this was Sean Price Films' directorial debut. And it does something that most cinematographers don't do when they first branch out. I mean, most of them, they focus on like just shoot things really well and they focus on visuals. This one focuses on so much more. This blends so much in. I mean, it even has a short instance of animation, and there's a sequence with background paintings that could remind us a little bit about Quay Brothers as well. It goes in so many different directions. Like you said, it makes sense that it could be on a VHS tape as well. The Gregoraki comparisons fit too, but at the same time, it's just such a unique thing. And another thing I love about it is just how many standout characters we meet along the way. I mean, one of the highlights has to be Simon Rex as this kind of courteous white knight neo-Nazi. It's just one of the acting highlights of the year, where, you know, he inhabits so many toxic traits while also trying to be like this protector. Like he's such an interestingly complex character that just writes so well. Just absolutely fantastic. In fact, Sean Baker, who directed Simon Rex previously, like that's another really, really good comparison point for this film as well.
So some people have referred to the movie as uneven because that particular character is so intriguing and so well sketched out. To me, I think I really love the whole movie, and I just think that that's a kind of standout, that portrayal. And I think there's this very sort of interesting moment where Lillian picks up a book off of his shelf, which is a copy of Mein Kampf. But when she opens it, there's this classic film thing where people open a book and inside, you know, that a lot of the page has been cut out and there's a gun. Instead, she opens this one, and I think that it looked like there were a bunch of lemon sherbets in there, you know, sort of boiled yellow sweets, and I just thought that was a great metaphor, is that there's something very sweet about the guy, but that he's also a Nazi. And I think what I love about this film is that it is so challenging, because when I've read about this online, everyone does have just a polarized response, you know, oh no, this guy's a Nazi, you know, he's evil, you know, let's hope that he gets sort of strung up by his unmentionables or whatever. Whereas I sat there thinking, this is a guy who has a sort of crisis going on in his soul, and I found him very interesting. Sure, he's sort of guilty of quite a lot. He just was very interesting to me, and I hope what's coming across to people here is that this is a must-watch movie.
Definitely. So damn unique and powerful and varied, and again, Simon Rex had one of the best performances of the year in the Sweet East. And that brings us to the final film of the main slate, the Mexican family drama Totem, which focuses on a young girl who cannot understand why she can't see her father. This can be a bit of a tearjerker, but it's done in a visceral style that often puts us at the vantage point of the young girl and makes everything from her inner turmoil to the feelings of her family come alive, and makes all of us stuck in the same kind of uneasy state of confusion where we just don't know what exactly is happening, though we can guess. How did the Totem affect you, Matt?
Thanks, Chris. So this is the one film that I programmed that has made it through to the main slate. So I saw this at the London Film Festival. It's a great movie. Again, it's one of those movies with a lot of emotional acuity. If you don't know Lola Aviles and wanted to sort of place her against someone else, like Lucretia Martel, I guess, is someone that you could sort of crudely compare her movies to. She did very well with her movie The Chambermaid in 2018. Although this movie is uneasy points and you're often trying to work out what's going on, they don't tell you exactly, what everyone's preparing for. It's clear that people are preparing for something, but we're not sure what. There is an amazing payoff at the end, so I'm not going to spoil the ending for everyone, but there's an absolutely wonderful payoff. So it's about family. It's a very loving movie. It's kind of counterpoint to the Peasants, I guess, which is, as you said, Chris, very misanthropic. This film, I guess, is the opposite of misanthropy. Lots of people are having particular problems in their life. They're overcoming their daily hurdles, but they're also managing to come together for somebody else. So I think it's an amazing movie. I recommend it to everybody. And particularly, so Lola Aviles was at the screening that I attended, and she just did let out quite an emotional plea that please can everyone just watch this movie and talk about this movie, because I won't be able to make another one, if you don't. And she talked about it as the tragedy of filmmaking, that particularly with any films like this, it's very hard to find a global audience, and that she can't afford any mistakes. And she referred to it as the tragedy of cinema, that, there are lots of great directors out there who make films like this, but, they can't really overcome people not going to see their films. So I really do hope that people make the time for this one. It's really emotionally demanding, but also emotionally beneficial. I think hopefully you walk away from this movie feeling good about the world. And I'm just very pleased it's been picked by the jurors.
Yeah, I love Totem as well. I think Lola Aviles, she had herself to a really increasing canon of films that manages to place themselves close to children in times of turmoil as well. I couldn't help to compare it to Summer 1993, After Sun, 20,000 Pieces of Beast from this program as well. Her camera work is spectacular. I really hope that she doesn't fall off the map. I think she's someone who can bring us many masterpieces in the future. Yeah. I think they just so much right. She manages to maintain the mysterious atmosphere, but also capture the buzz of the family and the home, and just slowly have this sinking understanding in all of us that something is very, very wrong. It's not as visceral as some of those other films focused on children that I've mentioned, but it really manages to firmly place us into the world of our young protagonist. And there's just this wonderful closeness and movement to it that makes the film so dynamic throughout, especially as it opens up and just brings in the family and their emotions as well. So absolutely a great choice, Matt, and I'm so happy you nominated it, and I'm so happy it ended up on the main slate.
Yeah, I think we've got a really strong collection of films for the jurors this year. Every year we say this, a lot of absolutely incredible movies, end up in the minor slates for this festival as well. So please do see if you can catch some of those. Grit is an example. The Girl and Spider, The Settlers, The Beast in the Jungle. There's just a lot of very good films that are in the minor slates for this festival as well.
Yes, and I can reveal that The Settlers was the film that got the most support from the programmers behind it as well, but still didn't quite make the cut. Like, it's essentially a semi-minimalist Western that just takes us into the wilderness and shows us the brutality of colonization. It's really, really dark but captivating watch. And on my part, I think you mentioned earlier The Beast, Matt, and the other version of that, The Beast in the Jungle by Patrick Sheehan, that is actually in the slate. It's one of my favorite films of last year as well, and one I didn't get to talk about in the 2023 episode because I had not seen it yet. And it just spins us through decades, minimizes time, takes us from the 70s and into the 2000s as music and historical events fall past and the potential romance continues with some very mysterious underlines there. So that's one I would definitely want all of the art house viewers to listen to. It. Also fully support your shout out of Grit. That's one of my favorite as well. And I've spoken about it before on the podcast. Yeah, there's just so many highlights from this program. I mean, Green Border is not one if we consider making our centerpiece. That's one of the Thomas nominations, and we talked about that at length in the Best Films of 2023 podcast as well. There's the harrowing refugee drama. We have some wonderful art house films like Here, and another one of my top favorites from 2023, Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World, which again we talked about at length. There's also some really exciting animation like the Chinese semi-Ghibli film Deep Sea. Absolutely excellent. You have dramas like Creatura. You have the Chilean 1976 just fueled with so much paranoia. You have the utterly crazy, just I'm not even going to spoil what the hell is happening here, but She Is Conan. There's this obviously, again, through time, through all of these different vignettes by Bertrand Mandico, one of the most exciting visual artists working at this point. Utterly insane. And the semi-fairy tale, what do we see when we look at the sky as well? So, yeah, lots packed here. The sub-slates and minor slates, they're still under work, so you're going to be prepared soon, and they're obviously out by the time this episode airs. So again, if you're not on icmforum.com, sign up, join the festival, watch the films. Everything kicks off on the 18th of November, but the slates will be live before then, so you can start planning your viewings. It's going to be so much fun, and I hope to see you there. So until next time, thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon.
You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.